Yeah, thanks, Kelly. So again, I'm Jonathan Petry. I'm an architect by profession. I've been on the climate action team for about 18 months now. It started as a 4-month detail doing sustainable buildings, but it's changed. Our team is fairly dynamic. It's a bunch of really smart, highly trained professionals, a lot of scientists from Searle and Corel, and we cover the breadth of things. We have GIS experts, climate experts, uh, building experts, natural built solutions experts, sociologists. We've had a lot of diversity on the team for the last, at least for my participation for the last 18 months. Um, we work for Dr. Kate White, who used to be with the Corps of Engineers, and she works under Mr. Kidd, who is retiring this week. But Mr. Kidd is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Environment and Energy Resilience. But he has kind of loaned us out to the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Construction. So Kelly and I kind of pull double duties and try to um, help both both of those offices develop policy and figure out a path forward on a lot of changing instructions that we're getting from both the executive branch as well as from Congress. So, Kelly, why don't we jump to the agenda?
Yeah, is that still presenting?
It's yeah, you're
Okay,
presenting a full screen there. It's good.
great. Sometimes it doesn't work. Okay.
So again, we're gonna just I'll probably start touching on resilience a little bit. Kelly's going to cover our sustainable strategic plans. We'll talk about some policies that we have going on, and then a whole lot of things that may or may not affect you where you sit for the Corps right now. Some of these things will happen in your backyard, and some of these things will happen with your support. But I think they all indicate kind of what the future is for Corps projects and things that you'll start to see change in the policies, in the unified facilities criteria, as well as in guide specifications and project documents. Next slide, Kelly. So the department, again, we try to be as apolitical as possible. So sometimes word choices matter when we're doing that. But both of the deputy assistants that we work for and their boss, the Assistant Secretary of Defense, um, Mr. Owens, they we'd like to withstand changing administrations, kind of keep that pendulum from swinging back and forth, back and forth. And sometimes when we've talked about green or we've talked about sustainable or we've talked about other things, um, it's felt like whiplash. And so the word we choose to use now at the department is resilience. And it really is a combination of two things. It's the mitigation and the adaptation. And I think as the Corps, NAFAC, AFCAC, the DCAs who deliver our projects, as well as all the AE partners that support us, are really good at adaptation right now when we're talking about building new buildings. But we're uh, we're also charged with, and what I focus a lot of my time is the mitigation side of things. Again, we focused a lot on energy reduction. We focused a lot on efficiency, especially with new buildings, but we haven't thought about all those embodied emissions that go into our supply chain or that go into our energy production or uh, that are that start to deplete the resources that we depend on. So our mission and really what fell into our climate adaptation plan is to ensure the DoD can operate under changing climate conditions, preserving operational capability and enhancing and protecting the natural and man-made systems essential to the department's success. So while it'd be good if we could focus on mitigation and adaptation at the same time, a lot of what we'll talk about today is probably the mitigation thing. Let's assume that some of these effects may never happen or that they may not be baked in um, because we can prevent them through choices that we make right now. Again, it was reinforced again to both Kelly and I this morning that when we make decisions to site a building or to construct a building, we say 40 years decisions for life cycle systems, but it ends up being you know, we have buildings that have been there for 100 years. We have a few buildings that date back to like the 1700s when we were doing the building inventory. So there's there are long-term decisions that are made, and that's what we'll talk about today. Is we're kicking off some of those long-term decisions to try to do so in a way that preserves resources for us to be able to use in the future. Kelly, you can take over the next slide.
Jonathan, a lot of the work that the office that Jonathan and I are in, the two that he mentioned, environment and energy resilience and construction, a lot of our work centers around the goals of Executive Order 14057, which is the main sustainability executive order that came out at the beginning of this current administration. The White House Council on Environmental Quality released 3 strategic plan templates to help agencies identify goals and annual targets and a whole lot of challenges, resource requests and needs, identifying actions, plans, coordination, a little bit of everything related to a couple of the main target areas of EO 14057. So the 3 that we're going to talk about today, the first one that we'll spend the most time on is the building strategic plan, this top one. And the building strategic plan, because we never have enough acronyms, recently got rebranded as the net zero emissions buildings plan. So I'll refer to it as both. The second plan that CEQ came out with is the carbon pollution free electricity plan. That's indicated by this center one. And that one thankfully did not change its name. So the CFE plan has remained now for 2 years. And then the final one that also got a rebranding is the zero emissions fleet vehicles, also known as the, let me see if I get this right, electronic vehicle supply equipment strategic plan. So we have a whole lot of acronyms floating around, but they're all centered around EO 14057. And the targets that were set in the executive order and then laid out in the implementing instructions and then reinforced by these plans are the agencies to carry out. So once we identify how we intend to comply with the requirements of the executive order, it's up to each agency to set those in motion. So Jonathan and I are going to talk a little bit about what the executive order and the strategic plans call for us to do. And then we're going to talk about how DOD is carrying that out, because DOD is unlike any other agency for many reasons. Number one, we are incredibly huge when it comes to the number of assets that we have. Our structures, our linear structures, the amount of land we have, but most importantly for us, for Jonathan and me, and those of us on the call, it's the number of buildings that we have, far more than any other agency. We're also geographically distributed across all 50 states, US states, territories, and internationally. We have assets in a lot of different climate zones. We are far removed from major cities. We have more difficulty sometimes procuring supplies, getting them places. We're just responsible for a whole lot more. And so CEQ has really been working with DOD to try to understand the unique problems that DOD faces in implementing these goals. The goals are already lofty and difficult and important, but when it comes to the DOD building inventory and the unique challenges we face because of our decentralized model of decision-making for a lot of activities related to buildings, it makes it incredibly challenging. So we had an FY23 plan that we submitted to CEQ a couple months ago, and that was approved. And that was kind of a preliminary target setting and trying to recognize what data we have and what data we need. And so now we're on the second round of planning. So we recently received the FY24 plans, and we are just starting to figure out how to respond to the requests of CEQ in order to work on those plans all summer long and submit those to CEQ on September 1st. So what is actually in those plans and what are they asking us to do? I'm going to focus mostly on buildings. So the net zero emissions building goals, as laid out in the executive order, are for a net zero emissions building portfolio by 2045 and a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2032 as an interim goal. So the specific goals that the strategic plan wants us to respond to as kind of a framing of how we're going to go about this lofty endeavor is to set FY 2030 annual targets for reducing energy use intensity and water use intensity on a building or installation level. And as I mentioned, DOD is very different from all the other agencies, and the inclusion of the word installation level was extremely important to us because we don't do most things at the building level. And so when these goals were set and when the implementing instructions were framed by CEQ, DOD fought hard to have the installation level recognized as an important metric of success, because some things we can only measure at the installation level. So we are looking at energy use intensity and water use intensity. We're trying to look at it on the building level, but sometimes it comes up that we just have to look at it on the installation level. This year, we're also looking to set target percentages in terms of total gross square footage of our building assets that will meet both the federal building performance standards and deep energy retrofit requirements. So those are two separate but sometimes overlapping requirements. We are also setting targets for Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions reductions delivered through performance contracting. And finally, we're developing narratives around a couple of important topic areas that CEQ is not yet ready to set further targets or requirements in. They're still in a data gathering phase. So they're asking the agencies, and DOD is going to in turn ask the military departments to contribute some understanding towards some of the challenges and the considerations that we need to take with regards to budget planning, organizational change, environmental justice, and the future of work. And so those areas are really chances for us to communicate to CEQ and to the White House some of the challenges that are unique to DOD, some of the considerations that we're already making, coordination we already have around these areas, tools we already have to assess things like environmental justice and to think about budget planning. And then in the future, we anticipate that they might give us some more specific goals or requirements around some of these areas. The other two plans that I'm not going to touch on quite as much because it doesn't pertain to us as much are the CFE plan and the ZEV/EVSE plan. So those goals, I've listed them out here. And again, the plans that CEQ has set for us just allow DOD to baseline where we are now and to set annual targets for how we're going to achieve these goals. So for example, annual targets for clean energy procurement and annual targets for on-site clean energy generation. And then for ZEV, annual targets for ZEV acquisition and the installation of EV charge ports, and how we are going to improve fleet management and how we're going to deploy ZEVs. So where are we going from here with these strategic plans? Like I said, they're due in September. And so at the OSD level, what we're working on for the next few months are coordinating with Army, Air Force, Navy, and the Washington headquarters services at the headquarters level for all of these. We're going to gather a bunch of data. We're going to make our plans, write our narratives, try to set some targets for what we think is feasible in the next few years, set some annual targets. We're going to bounce back and forth with CEQ. We're going to get some of their advice, and then we're going to run that plan up the chain of command and get that signed off on by the Assistant Secretary of Defense. And eventually, we will be getting the Deputy Secretary of Defense approval on our plan. So pretty high level goal setting. That's what CEQ expects. But how does that actually translate to the work that Jonathan and I and our colleagues are doing? I am going to hand it over to Jonathan, and he is going to talk a little bit about one of the policies we have already done, and then I'll talk about a forthcoming policy.
Thanks, Kelly. So many of you may have seen the electrification memo. Many of you may have questions. Many of you have already maybe asked me questions about this, and I'll do my best to answer any questions anybody adds to the chat, or if anybody's too shy and wants to reach out afterwards. But also realize that this policy, the target probably isn't the people on this call. The target is the MILDEPs and the leadership at the kind of assistant secretary level. The Army has come up with a subsequent policy, and that will inform what I assume will be an ECB from Ed and from Ryan and from Scott and the team up at headquarters that will tell folks what to do next. So it's a I don't know, a starter pistol for a marathon. Uh, you can see we have a CFE plan. We are trying to leverage our immense buying power through giant contracts with DLA and others to get cleaner electricity put on the grid. Whatever the source might be, that's a big push, and the administration wants the support of everybody, and the DOD wants support of everybody, because it will make us more resilient. And for us, a resilient energy grid is a key factor in our preparedness and our ability to recover. Um, if you think about a challenge, if we decided to harden or make more resilient both of our distribution systems, natural gas and electricity, you could see why that might be cost prohibitive, or we might be have divided attention. We can't use gas without electricity, at least not easily, not with the systems that we use. Um, and to some degree, we can use gas to make electricity, but do so in a more centralized location where we're not piping everything and having to worry about fugitive emissions and other things, not combusting, not causing health concerns inside of buildings for combustion. Because even if it's minute, it's still a focus right now is going to be healthy buildings for us and improved indoor air quality, which combustion doesn't always align with. So we're sending a signal to the marketplace, which is what Deputy Secretary of Defense Ms. Hicks has said, and that's why this policy's out. And you probably, if you've read 14057, if you're on this call and you're probably interested in this stuff, you might ask, well, they only want us to do X amount of percent. Well, as Kelly mentioned, we got 512 installations that burn fossil fuel right now. We have 580,000 buildings that use some sort of electricity or some sort of fossil fuel use right now. If we start now and do it at the pace we do, which is touch 250 buildings a year or so, we would never finish. So how can we kickstart it? How can we focus on everything right now? Get rolling on this. For many of our climate zones, this will be a piece of cake. For some of our climate zones, it'll be more difficult. So there are exemptions in there. There are exceptions. There are ways to do what's smart. There's a question from let's see. Sean asked, not Sean. Somebody asked. Sven asked, how are we managing life cycle cost analysis? So you need to perform a life cycle cost analysis on all electric systems. We prohibit things all the time. We've just taken one thing off the table with this memo. There's still ways you can do that, whether that's different technology solutions, there are different systems. How you do that, you still want to go through and analyze it. You want to make some choices. There's still design decisions to be made. It doesn't mean just you're not swapping out a gas boiler for something else. You're going to have to figure out, and there's going to have to be design solutions to this. Ed answered those questions a little bit. You did mention you can do better. I don't really think that Department of Energy, who's already trying to get oversight on every one of our projects, is going to offer us any support in making our own legal determinations. Obviously, we haven't published any interpretation of this yet, but as this policy went out, as it was coordinated, as we discussed with all the attorneys who had an opinion on this, it's not prohibited. We want we want to use electricity right now, and we want to do so in a life cycle cost-effective manner. Even if natural gas is super, super cheap where you are, it's prohibited for other reasons, not for cost reasons.
If I might though, Jonathan, it's like what my essential question, I've asked this on several forums here though, is like, how do we get to that? Because I see that 10 CFR 436 is being public law. And what I'm hearing through the responses is that, well, we're just going to eliminate these other choices. So we're going to limit what we're looking at. And what I don't understand is how we got to that. Because I don't see the pathway that allows me to simply ignore natural gas solutions when I'm doing a life cycle cost analysis. It seems arbitrary and capricious So it's like, how have the attorneys decided that we can just eliminate options? Where's the pathway that allows us to do that?
So Sven, we eliminate options all the time in our specs. We eliminate options in our criteria all the time. You can't use VRF systems right now, can you?
But that's not public law. I understand
No,
that.
but it's not.
And I,
But the public law 10 CFR 436, I mean, and the others, I mean, it is a maze. It is complex. There is a lot of stuff. It talks more about the process. It talks about going through a process by which you would ensure that we are spending money wisely. And so we still want to go through that process, but that process, yes, has severely constrained choices right now. And there might be a very, very cheap way to do something that we're just not going to allow right now. And we do that when we set quality standards all the time. We're just thinking about quality different. And our goal now is not energy use, it is not cost, it is emissions. And so we still have not really gotten great guidance on how to consider the social cost of carbon, but that's one pathway that I've heard GSA and others been talking about that would affect our life cycle cost analysis. But we still want people to go through and make smart choices, but figure out, how they're gonna do standard building operations, but in an all electric manner. So one life cycle choice might be, how much are you going to reduce through efficiency versus how much are you going to produce on site through renewables, or how much are you going to purchase? That's a huge choice that has lots of factors to consider when you're trying to decide, because we could easily make a lot of things net zero just by buying a ton of renewable energy. But that's not our goal. Our goal is to figure out what is the most life cycle cost efficient manner to reduce our efficiency to the point where we don't have to have those long those really expensive purchase agreements for decades upon decades, or that we end up with a whole lot of PV or solar arrays or wind farms or things that we would have to then maintain and keep cybersecurity and things like that.
What? Oh, I'm just
Uh,
listening to this.
Again, we could probably have an entire webinar on life cycle cost effectiveness. One of the things that we'll be working on in policy is updates to DOD instructions that maybe make the pathway more clear between public law and the ECBs or the ERs or the UFCs that USACE will put out, but we're trying to connect the dots there. We're trying to inform or maybe translate goals that we're getting from higher up into a way that makes sense or that's easily to follow by the MilDeps and then by the design and construction agents.
that would be much appreciated because, like I say, as I see it, I believe that we have conflicted requirements right now. And that's what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to deconflict, for myself and my staff. It's like requirement to perform life cycle cost analysis and how we arbitrarily remove some things from consideration. And I do appreciate you brought up the VRF, and that's an interesting thing because, like, out here in the Northwest where I'm working, for renovation of existing facilities, variable refrigerant flow systems would be an optimal choice, and yet mystically that's been eliminated from consideration in the UFCs. It's now on the table again, but I would say that that's like probably one of our most viable solutions to reduce energy consumption and to do retrofits. But that doesn't conflict with the CFR, right? That's just like a separate choice to eliminate, them or to make them a less desirable option. And I think that's for control reasons, purposes, which is a separate issue. But again, I would appreciate, further discussions, maybe one set up specifically for how we do life cycle cost analysis and how we navigate this thin line between Code of Federal Regulation requirements and policy. Thank you.
Yeah,
Sven,
good. Great question, Sven.
yeah, Sven, this is Scott Wick. So long story short, there's very, very extensive conversations that go on for VRF and Tim Gordon is, I mean, I don't know when the last time you guys had a COP meeting was. Well, actually, I do know it was 2 months ago. I don't know if you were there or not in Tulsa, but I mean, these are the kinds of questions that your COP leads can absolutely, I mean, they're the ones that write the policies for it. So they can absolutely give you, I mean, I could do it right now. I could tell you right now that the real reason we don't like VRF is because 90% of the time you have to run the lines through occupied spaces, and then they leak, and then they cause problems, and that's not good, and that's why we don't like them. And we're reconsidering that as the technology gets better. But I don't want to derail Kelly and Jonathan, but just to make a point, when you do life cycle costs, do you consider coal? Do you consider coal fired stuff?
Well, I do. We go all the way back to whale oil in Kansas City.
Well,
'cause
but
we
I
do
mean, but that's
life
my
cycle cost analysis historically.
exactly. Would it be
Right.
cheaper? Yeah, I'm sure it would be. But I mean, we've got to draw the line somewhere, and we're drawing it. We're drawing it against gas on the other side of gas today. I mean, that's you may find it capricious, but if the administrations and Congress and G9 and IMCOM and us don't sort of guide everybody in these directions, yeah, there's people out there that are still use coal. I promise you that. And you may laugh, but we, that's what we're saying. We're looking forward. We're not looking backward. So,
Oh, no,
John?
we're using coal, all right. I see it every day on my beach walks down in Edmonds, Washington, where coal trains are moving to Canada, where it's getting exported to China. So it may not be being burnt here in Centralia, Washington at one of our foremost power generation plants, but we're moving it on rail to sea overseas. So yeah, agreed.
Jonathan, sorry to interrupt, my good man.
Yeah, no, again, good. I think it's good sidebar because it gets to the heart, which is we have to make a lot of tough choices on a very large portfolio, and interpreting law, interpreting policy. This is, I think, anybody who likes having this kind of fun, come do a detail with Kelly and I, because this is what we get to do all day long, is try to figure out um, what's how do we achieve the big goals while we're making it clear, because came from the execution side. I came from trying to do this on mega projects and on much smaller scale things. I'm always thinking about how do we do this in practice, and realize that the electrification memo, although it's probably mostly designers, engineers, and folks on the call here, um, this is maybe a bow shot to installations and IMCOM and things like that. They have to do a better job of planning and looking at their vulnerability and looking at their resilience. This is a reason for them to plan differently, to improve their installation energy plans, to improve their installation resilience plans, to integrate it all with their master plans, to plan more than 5 years into the future and think about where they're going to be as maybe weather patterns shift and things like that, and to then ask for the money necessary. And with all the funding that's happening right now through DOE, through effect grants, through ERSIP, through ESTCP, through other things that are trying to get new technology in place on our facilities right now, now's the time. The installation with the plan, with the USACE districts and the other AE firms that support them, are probably going to get more money, and they're probably going to get better stuff. And they have to do all that. Not like they're going to flip the switch and all their buildings are going to be electric tomorrow, but over the next 30 years, it seems like they're going to have to flip the switch slowly and really invest in distributed energy resources, microgrids, the ability to island. That's the other point that we didn't bring up earlier on electrification. We don't really have the ability to drill down, extract fossil fuel and just use it on our installations. I guess we could in practice, and we could put up refineries and stuff, but we do have the ability now, and maybe different abilities in the future, to produce electricity on site, which makes us, again, a little more defensible. We can do things a little bit more, few things inside the fence, And then we could also maybe support the communities that support our installations outside. When we get more resilient, when we use less, it means our communities right outside the fence line can thrive a little bit better too. Kelly, that's probably enough on electrification memo. We could ramble all day on this. We'll jump to the next slide.
Yeah, that was actually a great segue to the forthcoming integrated installation resilience policy. All the elements that Jonathan just mentioned, the installation energy plan, the installation resilience plan, are going to be integrated per this forthcoming policy. Again, this will probably not apply to many of you, but it's good to be aware of the type of policy that is coming out of DOD that folks on the installations are going to be having to contend with. The idea is not necessarily to create any brand new plans, but rather to integrate them so that there's a better understanding of how they intersect, and importantly, how we need to consider various hazards into our long-term planning. There are certain hazards in certain areas that we're better at planning for. For example, if we're in a place with a lot of hurricanes, we're already thinking about hurricanes and coastal flooding. Perhaps we're thinking a lot about wildfires. But the goal of this policy and a lot of the work coming out of the Environment and Energy Resilience Office is to think about all of the hazards over various scenarios of climate change over the next 30 to 60 years. And so we do that with various tools that our team members are helping to develop. And the objective of this IIRP is to integrate all those plans together with an all hazard assessment across various timeframes so that we can make the best investments now and choices now. And I also want to point out, as Jonathan mentioned and alluded to, resilience, which is both mitigation and adaptation, is not just about energy. It's also about the community. And in this IIRP, we're considering a number of different types of resilience, and the folks making these plans are called to consider climate, energy, water, and wastewater, integrated solid waste, cyber, and community. And that means how can we support the community and what vulnerabilities are in the community that could affect military readiness on an installation. And so a good example of that, probably one of the most visible and easy to understand examples of resilience, is a microgrid. So combining energy generation on an installation with a microgrid allows that installation to have continual energy in the event of anything that happens to the grid outside of its borders. And in the future, all of that we're hoping is more connected together, so the installation can also provide energy outside of its gates to the community that surrounds it. So that's just another policy that is forthcoming. There will be a couple more over the next few years, and hopefully Ed invites us back to talk about those. And we are going to now shift over to another part of decarbonization project planning. And this is getting back just to our giant building inventory in DOD. So a couple projects that our office is that we are advancing fall within these lovely acronyms that we have developed. And the basic premise is taking our massive DOD building inventory, doing some sort of screening at a data analytics level to identify good candidates for projects, choosing a small subset of those that we've identified with data analysis and actually doing on-the-ground assessments. And then from those on-the-ground assessments, selecting an even smaller number of buildings that are good candidates for all types of projects. We're calling it deep energy retrofit because deep energy retrofit speaks to both a process and an outcome. But the process is really the part that we want to emphasize. The process of a deep energy retrofit is something that spans across multiple different systems in a building. We're not just looking at equipment swap out or a single system. The idea is to capitalize on the synergistic benefits of tackling multiple systems at once and lowering energy use intensity in a building dramatically by swapping out equipment, improving the building envelope, decreasing the energy demand, and therefore downsizing the energy system. So when we talk about a deep energy retrofit, it's really about that process of thinking broadly about all of the different projects that we could tackle within a building, as opposed to just targeting one thing. So a little bit more on these projects that our office is advancing. The first is a really exciting partnership that we're working on with Erdic Searle. They're performing what we're calling the Deep Energy Retrofit Opportunity Tool, which is going to be a data-driven analysis of over 280,000 DOD buildings. We're trying to use real property data about the age of buildings, building component data from builder or the sustainment management system about equipment age, the type of equipment, the equipment fuel source, how soon that equipment might need to be swapped out, as well as any energy data that we do have access to apply a bunch of screening criteria and try to start kind of bucketing those buildings into different tranches of buildings that would be good candidates for different types of projects. Because we know that there's going to be no one size solution, one project fits all, because we have buildings everywhere that serve a lot of different purposes. So we're trying to categorize those buildings, identify which ones are really good opportunities and which ones maybe don't have as great of return on investment, and then we can worry about those later. And this project has already kicked off, and we're expecting a phase 1 building list from Searle sometime in July, and that'll be a high-level screening where we're really focusing on the real property data and what that can tell us about where buildings are and what types of buildings are the biggest outliers for energy use. And once we get those outputs of the tool from Searle, our office will be working directly with the headquarters of the Deputy Assistant Secretary level of Army, Navy, and Air Force to try to review the types of buildings that we're finding, because the whole point of this is to be an iterative process where we're providing some sort of tool and service and assistance to the military departments. We're not trying to come up with a solution and a list of buildings and then go out to anyone and say, here are the 10 buildings you need to work on, because we recognize that that's not how the military operates, nor is that the best use of anyone's time or resources. The second stage in this process are the deep energy retrofit assessments. These are on-the-ground appraisals. We're taking those opportune buildings that we've identified through data analysis, and the military departments and WHS are going to contract out deep energy retrofit assessments to local firms. This could be at the installation level or at the service level. And these are appraisals of the actual opportunities and the conditions that exist on the ground. So we are simultaneously, as we are identifying buildings that we think would be good candidates for further investigation, we're simultaneously coming up with that technical criteria that should be assessed on the ground, because we're not just going to go in and do the same old of like an energy or water audit. The energy and water audits that we do are a really good place to start, but there's so many more considerations that we need to look at to determine if a building is a good candidate. For example, if a building is a standalone building and it's not connected to a central energy plant, there's no other buildings in the area that could also benefit from deep energy retrofits, then we're looking at a standalone solution. But if we have a whole host of buildings that have a centralized utility plant, and all the buildings, perhaps they're built pretty similarly, we can start to think about approaches like at an industrialized scale to tackle multiple buildings at once, as well as a central utility plant. So we'll have more bang for our buck, and we'll be able to tackle energy use intensity at a much larger scale than a single building by building approach. And then the final phase of this, after we've done the data analysis, after we've done these appraisals on the grounds, the final stage will be to start implementing projects. And so again, we do have the deep energy retrofit projects that are going to leverage the whole building approach and integrative design. And the aim of these is a 40% reduction in EUI. However, not every building is going to, or really is a good candidate to achieve a 40% reduction in EUI. And so we're not trying to discourage the military departments from pursuing other projects that would be beneficial, both for electrification, equipment swap out, system upgrades, controls upgrades, retro commissioning, or a deep energy retrofit over time approach in which we identify multiple big projects and then we identify a phased approach. So there's a lot of different ways to approach this, and we fully recognize there's not going to be just one that's going to solve all of our problems. And that's why we're developing these tools and these approaches, and we're trying to support the military departments in pursuing a wide variety of different ways to come up with these projects and to fund these projects. Any questions on those? Otherwise, I think we're at the very last slide, and I'll hand over to Jonathan. Okay, Jonathan, take it away.
So we have two sets of pilot projects that are happening kind of right now. The one at the top is the biggest one because it's kind of in planning. There's a lot of conversations. I don't know, I feel like a dozen meetings a week as we try to figure out how to procure these. The goals of this project, the objectives, you can see there: net zero emissions. You can see Mr. Meandrew really would like to see better passive design. He toured facilities like RMI's headquarters in Basalt, Colorado, that has no mechanical room. He'd really like to see a building with no mechanical room someday, because no mechanical system means less things to break, and it means less things to keep cyber secure. And so how can we do that? What climate zones is that appropriate for? Where do the loads make sense that we could mitigate through passive strategies? Obviously, we're going to electrify. That's standard. Obviously, we want to get super efficient on these, but is that envelope improvements? Is that systems improvements? Hopefully, it's more envelope and it's more passive, but it could be larger pipe sizes, things like that for passive as well. And then, because we've got a huge effort on embodied carbon right now, many of you may have seen GSA's recent standards they published a week or two ago, but we will probably have the same within DOD, that will start to set limits to the environmental impacts that materials can have. And so one of the concerns that we have at the department is our MILCON process enable us to get success? Can we achieve net zero emissions through our current planning, design, acquisition, and construction processes? So Mr. McAndrew asked that we execute these projects through an avenue afforded to us through other transactional authority, which is causing lots of discussions all the way up to the secretariat level on what does that mean? What's the role of USACE in that? What's the role of NAFAC in that? What's the role of traditional AE firms? How are people going to compete? What's the scope of work really look like? But again, there's an FY24 and an FY25 project for each Air Force, Navy, and Army. And then the Army has one additional Volar barracks that they are going to try to do a renovation on through the same process. The outcomes that we're hoping for: learn if there's any things that the FAR has constrained us in the past on, that we could write business cases for and ask for changes to the FAR. Are there anything we could do within the bounds of the FAR, within our traditional MILCON processes, that would make it easier to achieve net zero emissions? How do we measure this? How do we know success? What technologies should we use? How do we write performance requirements? How do we set our criteria? There's a whole lot of lessons that we hope to gain out of these pilot projects. Plus, it's clearly going to be a fun acquisition strategy, something for us to learn as we go through this process as well too. That is in planning stage now. As I said, it's some FY24, 25 projects. Many of you may have been started work on those, but obviously since it's going to use other transactional authority, it's going to be a little bit different now, and we will get to see if industry can deliver us some net zero projects that we haven't been able to get so far using our current processes. The sustainable construction material pilot projects, this is required by the FY22 NDAA. There are 3 projects. One is a barracks at Joint Base Lewis McChord. One is a child development center at, it's in Virginia at Naval Station. I'm blanking on it, starts with an H. And then the other one is a command and control facility, consolidated command control facility down at Patrick Space Force Base. Each of those had already progressed pretty far along the design phase before they were told, hey, you're part of this pilot project, but hey, Congress came out with this and said, pick a project that's already kind of in the pipeline and go. So we, Services Volunteer Rep Projects, Searle, not Searle, I'm sorry, GSL, and folks from ERDIC are helping us to track this, helping to achieve consistency, helping to know kind of what the summary reports are, what the outcomes are going to be from those pilot projects. And obviously, this one we owe reports up to Congress. The first 7 projects we're doing on our own. I'm sure we'll declare success and we'll report stuff up to different people and market it at some point. But the sustainable construction pilot projects are require congressional reports that teams have already been putting together and giving kind of an interim fashion so far. The pilot projects that I get, if you can't change how much you're building and you can't change what materials you selected, all you can really do is try to buy the best versions of some pretty terrible products. How do you reduce the global warming potential of concrete or steel or glass or asphalt, which is what the Buy Clean focuses on. It's really not about buying clean. It's really about getting the industry to sell us cleaner versions of their worst products. And so there's some limits to what we could do on the time frame, but for those projects, we were not trying to affect the existing delivery schedules. And I saw a question from John Anderson. For the OTA projects, I do expect there will be an impact to MilCon design schedules and time constraints. But our leadership has said that those delays are acceptable. I'm not sure how that's being communicated down to the end users or the tenants who are expecting those buildings, but it is being talked about quite a bit at the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense level with his counterparts. So, to do this right, to really do integrated design, it's probably going to require industry to go back to almost zero. Lots of questions. I think the whole team on the DOD side has lots of questions about what does this mean for standards? What does this mean for things that we've typically done in the past? I think we're here to learn throughout this process as well too. So I do think that there will be some delays beyond maybe what was promised at the beginning of these projects. With that, any more questions on the pilot projects in general? Hopefully there's some folks in the team or they're on this call today that are tracking these things or that are contributing to these teams, but please let us know if you have any questions.
And Jonathan, there's a few other questions that were in the chat that I'm going to read aloud real quick. I put them on a Word document. One of them was the discussion of energy generation with biogas and how that is affected by the electrification memo.
So there's some discussions. Obviously, biogas, even if it's a byproduct of something, is combustion, and the intent right now is to stop doing combustion. We realize there's some central plants. We realize there's some things that are ongoing, but and some of those may be exceptions. Some of those we may need to continue to complete. Things that are already in use, keep using them. Don't switch something out just to switch something out. But at its end of life, at a trigger point, when it makes sense, the goal is to switch those out to more renewable sources than biogas.
Okay. I have another one for Kelly, and that is, Kelly, will the Searle tool be able to distinguish which opportunities the Army should go through with each building? So will it highlight that this building should be a DER, another RCX, and another a controls retrofit?
That is the hope. That is definitely not going to be a part of the July iteration. That might be about 9 months to a year out. But because this is a long-term and iterative process that we're going to go through several times as we coalesce on the projects that we're working on, we do anticipate at some point in time we'll have more information. An example of that would be if we have a building that has a way higher than expected energy use for the type of building it is, for the location, and for the age of the equipment inside of it, we might flag that one as possibly a good retro commissioning or controls upgrades project, but obviously it would require an on-the-ground deep energy retrofit assessment first, because we don't know for sure, since many of our buildings are not metered at the building level. So yes and no, but with all of these, it's going to require some on-the-ground assessment, because again, we only have the data that's available to us in real property, the builder system, and what little energy metering data we have available.
And Ed, so I would
Yep.
add to that too. I think these, this tool, it's to answer a couple questions, which is, do we have like a $1 trillion problem or like a $9 trillion problem? Like, how big is the problem, and how much of an impact can we make, and what time frame can we do that? I mean, just the assessments alone, I think we wedged like $10 million for assessments in FY24. That probably isn't going to make much of a dent. So what's the best way to spend that $10 million? Do we divide it up equally among Army, Air Force, and Navy? Does the Army get more because they have more buildings? What if the Navy has more buildings that are more suitable for it? Should they get more money? Part of this is to answer that question, but also to say, hey, for FY25, 26, 27, we need to ask for more money. Here's the problem. This is to define the problem. It may not get to the solutions right away. Again, I don't think OSD wants to dictate solutions to any of the services, but it will help us define how big that problem is and what resources we need to go to Congress to ask for.
Okay. There's two more questions that I'm going to go into. We're running out of time. The last question. So it may be with the analysis of the leased spaces.
Sorry, Ed, you cut out on me.
Yeah, I lost you.
Okay, sorry, in the chat, the last one that I saw was, how does this apply to leased spaces?
Spaces you are leasing or you are leasing out?
Brian, could you elaborate on your question?
Well, you're talking, this is a crowd of, you say, people, and most district buildings are not DOD owned, they're leased from usually GSA. And
Yes.
a lot of times we have temporary buildings that are, sometimes you occupy temporarily for like construction sites, but they're leased. Even though they're trailers, often trailers, those would still be considered buildings.
So typically temporary facilities are not required to comply with the majority of our sustainable building requirements, beyond like, we don't want to poison people inside. So if I'm understanding that correctly, you're not really responsible for your office in a construction trailer. If you're leasing, as many Corps of Engineers offices lease from GSA and federal buildings, you're also not responsible for it. I mean, GSA has its own pretty ambitious plans for a lot of their buildings, and so GSA may approach you as the owner of the building and have expectations for that office. The vast majority of the requirements that Jonathan and I are covering today and the policy, it's going to come into play for design and construction of buildings that USACE is designing and constructing. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Jonathan, do you have anything to add to that?
Just that, again, yeah, GSA's goals are the same as DOD's. I mean, they have very ambitious goals for their own reasons. And so, just like we're going to affect our tenants' behaviors with the buildings we deliver, and the Army, Air Force, and Navy are going to have to learn to maintain things differently, we're going to have to do the same for buildings we get from GSA. They might want to influence our behaviors in those buildings to help meet their targets. Over.
All right, and we're running out of time. I think the last email, Jonathan, sorry, the last question I'll send to you through email. And I think it's best, it's about a study and how they get a hold of one of the studies that was mentioned in one of the slides. So I'll send that and we'll answer that through email. If there's any additional questions that you have, please send them to me and I'll answer them. If you start a new subject, because I have so many emails from the sustainability webinar, start a new subject on decarbonization and the webinar that we had today, and I will be able to get to it much quicker than the massive amounts I get for this people accepting or declining this meeting. So with that note, I want to say thank you, Jonathan and Kelly. This was very informative. And for everyone else, have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you.